My name is Fiona, and I'm 34 years old, and my life used to revolve around things everyone else thought were worthless. I've always had this strange attachment to old things, the kind that creak, hum, and carry the scent of time long gone. While most people my age spent their weekends shopping for new gadgets or meeting friends for brunch, I spent mine in my late grandfather's workshop. It wasn't glamorous, just a cluttered shed attached to the back of my small house, filled with the faint smell of oil, wood polish, and dust. But to me, it was a sanctuary. My grandfather, Frederick Blake, was a tinkerer, a man who believed everything could be fixed if you just listened to it carefully enough. He used to tell me, "Machines have souls, Fiona. They just speak in frequencies we forget how to hear." When I was little, I'd sit on his lap as he tuned radios and wound clocks, fascinated by the soft ticking and crackling sounds. Those moments felt magical, like we were conversing with time itself. After he passed away, the workshop became mine. Most of my family wanted to sell everything in it, claiming it was nothing but junk. My mother said, "You're wasting your life in that dusty corner, Fiona. It's time to move on." My sister laughed, calling me the junk collector, but I couldn't let go. Among the boxes and broken tools sat one object I couldn't bear to part with: my grandfather's old wooden radio. It was beautiful in a strange, imperfect way, made of dark mahogany with a golden dial that had long since tarnished. The speaker cloth was frayed, and the tuning needle stuck sometimes, but when I turned it on, it made this low, comforting hum. It barely picked up stations anymore. But that didn't matter. That hum felt like my grandfather's presence, steady, familiar, patient. Every evening after work at the library, I'd go to that workshop, sit beside the radio, and tinker. Sometimes I'd polish its wood, sometimes I'd open the back to clean the circuits. Even though I had no real idea what I was doing, I just wanted to keep it alive. My coworkers often teased me about it. "You and your antiques," one would joke. "You should get out more, Fiona. Maybe buy a Bluetooth speaker instead." I'd smile politely, but inside, their words stung. They didn't understand. That radio was more than an object, it was a piece of history, a vessel of memory. It had been the background soundtrack of my childhood, always playing old jazz tunes as my grandfather worked. Even after years of silence, I could almost hear the faint echo of those melodies when I stood close enough. One rainy evening, I remember sitting there with a cup of tea, lost in thought. The power had gone out briefly due to a storm, and the room was dim except for a candle flickering beside me. I turned the radio's dial absent-mindedly, even though I knew it wouldn't catch anything. Static filled the air, the kind that sounds like whispers if you listen long enough. I smiled, shaking my head at myself. "Still no luck, huh?" I murmured, setting the cup down. But then, something strange happened. The static shifted, deepened, almost as if the radio had inhaled. I froze. The lights flickered, and for a brief second, the radio emitted a faint melody. A tune so hauntingly familiar it made my chest tighten. It was "I'll Be Seeing You," the same song my grandfather used to hum when he thought no one was listening. My eyes widened. I turned the dial again, but the sound vanished, replaced by silence. My heart raced. I checked the power cord, it was plugged in, but the electricity had just gone out again moments before. How could it have played anything? I told myself it must have been interference. Maybe an old frequency bleeding through. But deep down, I felt something shift that night. The radio wasn't done speaking. Over the next few days, I found myself drawn back to it more and more. I'd sit there after work, tuning the dial again and again, trying to recreate that sound. The more I tried, the more the static seemed to respond, like it recognized me. One afternoon, my sister dropped by unannounced. When she saw me hunched over the radio, she rolled her eyes. "You're still playing with that thing?" "Fiona, honestly, it's creepy. Grandpa's gone. Let it go." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it wasn't about grief, it was about connection. But instead, I just smiled and said, "It's not broken yet." She laughed, muttering something about me living in the past, and left. But I didn't mind. I turned the dial again, listening to the familiar hiss and crackle. And for a fleeting moment, I could swear I heard a whisper hidden beneath the noise, faint, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. The hair on my arms stood on end. Maybe it was my imagination, or maybe it was something else. That night, I dreamed of my grandfather sitting at his workbench, smiling at me through the glow of the radio light. His lips moved, but no sound came out, only static. When I woke up, the radio was on. I hadn't touched it. The dial glowed softly, the way it used to when my grandfather was alive. I sat up, staring at it, my pulse pounding in my ears. One night, when the lights flickered and that radio came to life on its own, I realized my grandfather's secret wasn't buried with him after all. That night, I heard a song playing through the radio that hadn't been broadcast in decades. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. The tune drifted softly through the static, warbled and ghostly, yet hauntingly familiar. I sat frozen on the edge of my bed, every nerve in my body alive. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the radio dial, and the melody floated through the air like a memory trying to find its way home. It was "I'll Be Seeing You Again." The same old jazz tune my grandfather used to hum. The one that always played in the background of his workshop when I was little. But this time, it wasn't just a brief sound or random static. It was clear, crisp, as though someone were broadcasting it live from another time. My first thought was that it had to be some late-night nostalgia station, maybe replaying old tracks for sentimental listeners. But when I checked the dial, my breath caught in my throat. The frequency wasn't even on the modern spectrum. The numbers on the tuner glowed faintly, stuck halfway between two stations that didn't exist anymore. I leaned closer, adjusting the knob gently, my heart racing. The more I tuned, the clearer the music became. But with it came something else, faint whispers, layered beneath the song. I pressed my ear close to the speaker, trying to make out the words, but they were distorted, almost melodic in their rhythm. I remember whispering into the empty room, "Grandpa?" The second I spoke, the music stopped. Dead silence. Then, just static. My stomach dropped. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at that radio as if it might start talking back. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe my imagination had filled in the blanks. I even laughed about it while making breakfast, but a strange unease lingered. That day at work, I couldn't focus. The whispering sound played over and over in my head like a broken record. When I got home, I went straight to the workshop. The air felt heavy, still carrying the faint scent of dust and oil. I turned the radio on again, half expecting nothing to happen. But as soon as I did, it hummed softly, the same deep, pulsing tone from before. I adjusted the dial slowly, listening carefully. This time, the static wasn't random. It moved, like it had direction, rising and falling as if responding to my touch. Then came a soft burst of sound, a woman's voice, faint and fragmented. "Hello? Anyone there?" I froze. My hand trembled as I turned the dial back a fraction. The voice repeated, clearer this time, though still shaky. "Is someone listening?" I felt the hairs on my arms stand straight. "Yes." I whispered back instinctively, even though I knew she couldn't hear me. My heart hammered in my chest. I waited, but the voice faded back into static. That night, I recorded everything on my phone. I wanted proof. Something tangible to show that I wasn't losing my mind. I replayed it before bed, listening closely. But the next morning, when I checked my recordings, the file was gone. Deleted. No trace in my storage, no sign it had ever existed. That's when the rational part of me started to slip away. I spent the following night sitting in front of that radio for hours, mapping every flicker of signal, every change in frequency. I filled an entire notebook with notes and sketches, times, frequencies, descriptions of the sounds. One night, while wiping dust from the back panel, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Faintly etched into the wood, just above the wiring, were small engraved letters. I held my flashlight closer. The carving was delicate, faded by age, but still legible. For F.B., the one who listens. My breath caught. F.B. Frederick Blake, my grandfather's initials. He'd never told me about any engraving like that, and I'd opened the radio dozens of times before. How had I missed it? But there was something else. Just below that engraving, almost hidden under a thin layer of grime, were smaller markings, symbols, or maybe letters, too faint to read clearly. I used a magnifying glass and carefully traced my finger over them. It wasn't gibberish, it was a name. Eleanor Ray. I didn't know anyone by that name. It wasn't anyone from our family. My mind raced. Was she the radio's maker? A previous owner? Someone my grandfather knew? I tried searching the name online that night, but nothing useful came up. Just a few obscure mentions of a woman who worked in early broadcast engineering during the 1940 seconds. Most of the information was vague, fragmented, like she'd been erased from history. The more I read, the stranger it became. Some old article snippet mentioned her disappearance after developing a revolutionary signal device. Another said her final invention was confiscated by authorities and never recovered. A chill crept down my spine. Could that invention have been this radio? I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every flicker of light made me jump. I left the radio unplugged, afraid of what it might do on its own. But even then, I could still hear it faintly humming from across the room, as though it were breathing. I sat there in silence, gripping the notebook, staring at the engraving on the back. My thoughts raced between fear and fascination. Who was Eleanor Ray? What connection did she have to my grandfather? And why did her name feel like a whisper that had finally found me? As the first light of dawn crept through the window, I made a decision. I had to find out who she was and what this radio really was. Because if I didn't, I felt like it might start finding me instead. But when I unscrewed the back of the radio, I didn't just find circuits, I found a name carved into the wood that wasn't his. The name carved inside the radio was Eleanor Ray, a woman I'd never heard of. For days, that name looped in my head, like a song I couldn't stop humming. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faint letters carved into the wooden casing. Eleanor Ray. It didn't belong there, not in my grandfather's radio, not in my family's history. And yet, there it was, burned into the core of something that had defined my entire childhood. I needed answers. The next weekend, I drove to the local historical society, a quiet building that smelled of yellowed paper and linseed oil. The elderly, archivist behind the desk, Mrs. Granger, recognized me instantly. "Ah, Fiona Blake," she said with a smile. I forced a polite laugh, though the remark stung. Something like that. I was hoping to look up some old engineering records, specifically, someone named Eleanor Ray. Her brow furrowed. "Ray, you say? That's not a name I've heard in a long time." She led me into the archives, where we flipped through brittle newspaper clippings and faded microfilm. I scanned article after article until one finally made my pulse quicken. The headline read, "Local radio engineer Eleanor Ray vanishes amid secret government project, 1947. The photo accompanying the piece was grainy, but there she was, a young woman in her 30s. Hair pinned up neatly, standing beside a radio console that looked eerily similar to mine. The caption beneath it read, "Miss Ray, a pioneering female engineer, was last seen leaving her workshop after claiming to have developed a new way of hearing the world." Mrs. Granger leaned in, her voice soft. She was quite the mystery. Brilliant, they say. Some folks thought she'd gone mad talking about frequencies that could store memory. Others claimed her work was seized by the government. My throat went dry. "Do you know what happened to her?" Mrs. Granger shook her head. "Disappeared without a trace. Some think she was silenced, others think she ran, but one thing's certain, her inventions vanished with her." I thanked her and left with copies of every document I could find. Sitting in my car, I reread the article over and over. A radio engineer who vanished after inventing something groundbreaking, and her name was inside my grandfather's radio. The coincidence was too strange to ignore. That night, I pulled the radio closer to my workbench and stared at it, tracing the letters with my finger. My grandfather and Eleanor Ray, what there could possibly connect them? The next day, I decided to dig deeper. I searched through my grandfather's old journals, the ones filled with sketches and notes about his tinkering projects. Most of it was mundane notes about voltage, vacuum tubes, and repairs. But near the back, tucked between 2 pages, I found something strange. A small folded paper, brittle with age. It was a letter. Or rather, half of one. The ink was faded, but I could still make out the words, "Frederick, they're watching. If you keep it, make sure it finds someone who listens. She'll understand the frequency she always does." No signature. I sat there staring at the words, my mind spinning. Who was she? Me or Eleanor? The moment I read the line, "Make sure it finds someone who listens," chills crawled up my arms. The engraving on the back of the radio said the same thing. For FB, the one who listens. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and static-filled evenings. Every time I turned the radio on, the static sounded more rhythmic, like a language hidden beneath the noise. I began to hear patterns, faint Morse-like pulses, almost like someone trying to communicate. One evening, I adjusted the frequency and heard it again, that soft, almost human whisper. At first, it was just my name. Fiona. I froze. The voice was delicate, feminine, coated in distortion. "Who are you?" I asked aloud, my voice trembling. The whisper came again, closer now, clearer. "Find me." The sound sent a cold shiver racing down my spine. My rational mind screamed that it was interference, some stray frequency bouncing through old wiring, but deep down something else told me it wasn't random. I spent that night researching signal anomalies, how ghost frequencies could appear from forgotten stations or overlapping bands. Nothing I found explained what I was hearing. Most broadcasts had moved to digital decades ago. There was no logical reason I should be hearing a woman's voice on a defunct analog frequency. The following morning, I brought the radio to a friend from the library, a hobbyist named Theo who loved restoring old electronics. I told him I wanted it examined for interference issues. He laughed when he saw it. "This thing's ancient," he said. "You sure you don't want to upgrade to something with Wi-Fi?" I smiled weakly. "Just see if you can figure out where the signal's coming from." A few hours later, Theo called me back, his tone uneasy. "So, Fiona, this is weird. The receiver's fine. There's no outside signal coming in. But it's broadcasting something internally." My heart skipped. "Internally? How?" He hesitated. "There's a low-level frequency loop inside the circuitry, like it's replaying stored sound. But that shouldn't be possible, not in a model this old." When I got home that night, I stared at the radio for what felt like hours. The soft hum filled the room, and I swore I could feel it pulsing through my chest. Finally, I whispered, "Eleanor? Are you there?" For a moment, silence. Then, through the static, faint, distant, unmistakable, came a woman's reply. "Keep listening." I sat there, tears welling in my eyes, fear and awe mixing inside me like electricity. Whoever or whatever she was, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just a radio, it was a message, a connection between past and present, waiting to be understood. And when I asked, "Who are you?" the voice whispered back, "Find me." From that moment on, the radio wouldn't stay silent. It was as if something inside it had woken up and it refused to sleep again. Every night, I heard faint transmissions. Not words at first, just fragments of sound. Soft pulses. Static that seemed to breathe. Sometimes, it almost sounded like a voice trying to rise above the noise, but never quite reaching clarity. I started keeping a logbook, marking the time and date of every strange occurrence. 10:37 p.m., faint humming. 11:22 p.m., short beeps like Morse code. 12:01 a.m., whisper resembling, "Help me." I filled pages quickly. It wasn't just random static anymore, it was deliberate, structured. I played the recordings back dozens of times, each time hearing something new. Words began to form out of the distortion names, numbers, musical tones. It was like the radio was speaking in a forgotten language. The next day, at work, my coworkers noticed the dark circles under my eyes. One of them, Melanie, chuckled and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost, Fiona. Maybe that radio of yours really is haunted." I smiled weakly, pretending to laugh along. But my stomach twisted. I hadn't told anyone about the voice. Not really. How could I? Who would believe that an old wooden radio might be talking to me? But the strangest part wasn't the voices. It was what I found when I dug deeper. After the encounter with Theo, I began researching more about Eleanor Ray. Her name had been all but erased from official archives, but I managed to track down a few patents under her name. They were all labeled experimental audio encoding. One phrase in particular stood out: signal transference through harmonic distortion, the preservation of sound within interference. Preservation of sound within interference. It sounded like science fiction, but it perfectly described what was happening with my radio. The more I read, the more I realized what she had tried to achieve. Eleanor wasn't just designing a radio, she was attempting to encode and store information inside static frequencies. It was like hiding a message within noise, invisible unless you knew exactly where to listen. If my grandfather had worked with her, that would explain why the radio felt unique, why it behaved differently. Maybe he wasn't just repairing it all those years ago. Maybe he was protecting it. One night, I sat at my workbench with the radio, my notebook open, surrounded by papers and diagrams. I tried aligning the tuning dial precisely to the frequencies Eleanor's patents mentioned. My hands trembled as I moved the knob 97.3, 97.4, 97.5. The static deepened, the hum vibrating through the floor. Then, all at once, the distortion stopped. A clear tone rang out low, smooth, steady. Then came the whisper. "Find the numbers," I gasped, leaning closer. "Numbers? What numbers?" The voice didn't respond. But after a few seconds, faint clicking sounds replaced it, rhythmic. Repeated 3 times. Like Morse code. I grabbed my pen, writing them down as fast as I could. When I decoded the pattern later, my jaw dropped. It wasn't random noise. It was a coordinate, a set of longitude and latitude numbers. It pointed to a location just outside town. I checked twice, thinking it had to be wrong. But no, the coordinates were real. A small abandoned property on the edge of the industrial district. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Why would Eleanor or whatever was speaking through the radio lead me there? Was it where she worked? Or where she disappeared? The next morning, I took the day off work, telling my boss I wasn't feeling well. In truth, I couldn't think about anything else. I packed the radio carefully into a box, wrapped it in an old quilt, and placed it in my car. If it led me to that place, I wanted it with me. As I drove, the radio hummed softly, even though it was unplugged. The closer I got to the coordinates, the stronger it vibrated. I parked in front of a chain-link fence surrounding an old, crumbling factory. The paint on the metal gate was peeling, the letters on the sign barely legible. Ray Technologies, Broadcast Division. I froze. Eleanor's last name. I could barely breathe. My heart pounded as I got out of the car and stepped through a gap in the fence. The air was thick with dust and decay. My footsteps echoed through the empty corridors as I made my way inside. Old equipment was scattered everywhere, broken transmitters, shattered glass, rusted coils. But there was something eerily familiar about it all. The layout of the benches, the tools. It was almost identical to my grandfather's workshop. I reached the center of the room, where a single metal desk still stood. On it lay a faded photograph, 2 people standing side by side. My hands shook as I picked it up. It was my grandfather. And a woman. A woman with sharp eyes and a confident smile. Eleanor Ray. I sank into a nearby chair, my mind spinning. They knew each other, they worked together. And for some reason, They'd hidden this connection from everyone, even me. On the desk sat a dusty envelope, brittle and sealed with wax. My name was written on the front in fading ink, "To the one who listens." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in elegant cursive. "If you've found this, then you've already heard us. The truth is buried in the frequencies. Protect it. The wrong ears must never hear what's inside." Before I could even process the words, I heard it again, a faint sound behind me. Footsteps. And before I could even process her words, I heard footsteps echoing behind me in the factory. The coordinates pointed to an address just outside town, an abandoned factory. When I first saw that location on the map, it looked like any other forgotten piece of land. But standing there, in the middle of that vast, echoing building, I could feel it, the weight of time pressing down around me. Dust hung thick in the air, the faint smell of rust and oil clinging to every surface. The silence was so complete that even the smallest sound felt intrusive. And then, those footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, scraping softly against the concrete floor behind me. My pulse raced. I turned sharply, clutching the envelope in one hand and my flashlight in the other. The beam cut through the dark, revealing nothing. Just rows of rusted equipment and old shelving units. "Hello?" My voice cracked slightly, echoing back to me. No answer. Only silence, the kind that hums in your ears when fear grips too tightly. I took a step forward, the light trembling in my hand. Maybe it was just the building settling, I told myself. Old metal. Expanding and contracting. But deep down, I didn't believe it. The envelope still sat open on the desk. I reread the letter inside, tracing my finger over the words, "Protect it." The handwriting was unmistakably from another time, elegant and purposeful. Whoever wrote it wanted to be found, but only by someone who understood what listening truly meant. I scanned the desk again, hoping for more clues. That's when I noticed a small panel beneath it, half hidden by years of dust and grime. I crouched down, brushing the surface with my sleeve until I saw a faint indentation the shape of a keyhole. My eyes darted around the room. The only key I had with me was a small brass one I'd found in my grandfather's toolbox weeks earlier, attached to a tag that read, "Tuning." Without thinking, I pulled it from my pocket and slid it into the slot. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the panel popped open. Behind it was a hidden compartment, lined with faded blue velvet. Inside lay a thin metal box, about the size of a book. I lifted it out carefully. It was heavier than it looked, and engraved with two initials, EW. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a folded blueprint, the kind engineers used in the mid-20th century. The paper crackled as I spread it out across the desk. At first glance, it looked like circuitry, but the layout was far more intricate. It wasn't just for a radio, it was a transmitter, a receiver, and something else, something new. There were handwritten notes in the margins, likely Eleanor's. One line sent chills down my spine. When two frequencies match perfectly, they become one. That's where the truth hides. Underneath the blueprint was another photograph. This one showed Eleanor and my grandfather standing in front of a large prototype identical to the radio sitting in my workshop. My grandfather's arm was around her shoulder, both smiling proudly. So it was true. They had built it together. But why? And what did they mean by "truth hides in frequency"? Before I could think too long, that faint hum returned, not in my ears this time, but from the box itself. The radio I'd brought with me in the car. It was humming again. I quickly grabbed the radio, setting it on the desk beside the blueprint. Even though it wasn't plugged in, the tuning dial began to glow faintly, casting a warm, golden light over the paper. The sound deepened, resonating through the air, until suddenly a voice. It was faint, almost a whisper. "You found it." I froze. The voice wasn't Eleanor's. It was a man's, older, familiar. My grandfather. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. My breathing quickened. "Grandpa?" I whispered, barely able to get the word out. The voice continued. calm and steady. "If you've found this place, Fiona, then you're the one who listens. You always were." Tears welled in my eyes. I sank to my knees, listening as his voice faded in and out with the static. "Protect it," he said again, his tone urgent now. "They'll come for it, just like before." The radio crackled violently, and then, silence. I sat there in stunned quiet for what felt like hours, my hands shaking as I stared at the blueprint. The letter, the photograph, the hidden box, all of it connected. My grandfather and Eleanor hadn't just built a radio. They had built something revolutionary, something people had once tried to steal. As I packed everything up to leave, a noise echoed through the factory again, but this time, it wasn't the creak of old beams or the shifting of metal. It was footsteps, fast, purposeful, coming closer. I turned toward the doorway, clutching the box to my chest. A flashlight beam flickered through the darkness. Someone else was here. A man's voice called out softly, "Fiona Blake?" I didn't answer. My instincts screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The footsteps stopped just beyond the beam of my light. Then a figure stepped forward, tall, sharp-featured, wearing a dark coat. He smiled faintly, but his eyes were cold. "Don't be afraid," he said. "My name's Mason. I've been looking for you." And before I could even process her words, I heard footsteps echoing behind me in the factory. When I turned around, a man was standing there holding a flashlight, and he knew my name. The beam of light hit my face, and I instinctively raised a hand to block it. My heart hammered in my chest as the man stepped closer. His shoes clicked softly against the concrete, his shadow stretching across the floor like a long, dark thread connecting us. "Who are you?" I demanded, clutching the metal box tighter against my chest. He lowered the flashlight slightly, revealing a calm but unsettling smile. "My name's Mason," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "You must be Fiona. I was hoping we'd meet." I blinked, trying to process how he knew my name. I hadn't told anyone about the coordinates, the factory, or even the radio's strange messages. "How do you know who I am?" He took a few steps closer, hands raised slightly as if to calm me. "Relax. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm a collector of rare artifacts, historical pieces, inventions that have, shall we say, disappeared from the public record." His words made my stomach twist. "A collector?" I repeated, suspicion heavy in my tone. "You mean a thief?" He chuckled softly, the sound echoing through the cavernous room. "Depends on who's telling the story. Some of us just make sure important things don't end up forgotten. Like Eleanor Ray's work." The mention of her name made my breath hitch. "How do you know about Eleanor?" "Oh, I know quite a bit," he said, his tone shifting from charm to something sharper. "I've been following her trail for years. She created something far ahead of its time, something people weren't ready for. But your grandfather, he kept her secret alive, didn't he?" He nodded toward the box in my arms. "And now you have it." Every instinct told me to run, but something about his calm, practiced demeanor rooted me in place. "Why are you following me?" I asked quietly. He smiled again, almost sympathetically. "Because I'm not the only one looking for that device. There are others who'd do far worse than talk. I just want to make you an offer, a fair one. You give me the radio and whatever's inside that box, and I'll make sure you're well compensated." I stared at him, disbelief flooding through me. "You're offering to buy it? You don't even know what it is." "Oh, I know exactly what it is," he said, stepping even closer. "It's a prototype for harmonic signal preservation, a device capable of embedding sound, memory, even data within frequencies. Do you have any idea what something like that's worth?" His voice softened, coaxing. "Millions, Fiona, to the right buyer." The words felt dirty. My grandfather's legacy, Eleanor's brilliance reduced to a price tag. I shook my head. "It's not for sale." Mason's smile didn't fade, but his eyes hardened. "You're making a mistake. People will come for it whether you sell it or not. You're better off letting me handle it. I'm not giving it to you." The air between us thickened. He sighed, lowering his flashlight completely now. his face half shrouded in shadow. "You remind me of her, you know," he said quietly. "Eleanor. Stubborn, idealistic. She thought she could control it too." "What do you mean control it?" He tilted his head. "Didn't your grandfather ever tell you? The device doesn't just record sound. It absorbs it. It reacts to frequencies, to emotion. Even once it starts responding, it's no longer just a machine." I swallowed hard. "That's impossible." He smiled faintly. "Is it? You've already heard it speak, haven't you?" My throat went dry. He was right. Somehow, impossibly, he knew. "I can help you," he said, his voice soft again, almost hypnotic. "But if you keep it, you'll lose more than you realize. It's already connecting to you." "I don't want your help," I snapped, stepping back. "Stay away from me," he sighed, disappointment flickering across his face. I tried being reasonable. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed down the long hallway, fading into the distance until I was alone again. I stood frozen, trembling. When I finally dared to move, I packed the radio and the box into my car and sped home, glancing in the mirror every few seconds. For a while, I didn't see him again. But that didn't mean he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jump, the creak of the floorboards, the wind against the windows, even the faint ticking of the wall clock. The radio sat on the workbench, silent and still. I considered locking it away, but something inside me whispered not to. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of static, faint at first, then louder. The radio had turned on by itself. I stumbled out of bed and ran to the workshop. The dial glowed dimly, and the familiar hum filled the air. I reached for the power switch, but before I could touch it, a voice came through. "Fiona." My breath caught. It wasn't Eleanor this time. It wasn't my grandfather either. It was Mason. "You shouldn't have gone there," his voice said through the static, clear as day. I staggered back, staring in disbelief. How are you doing this?" No response. Just the faint hum of the signal, followed by a single burst of sharp feedback that made me wince. Then silence. The radio clicked off on its own. I stood there in the dim light, my hands trembling, the echo of his voice still in my ears. Mason wasn't just a collector, he was connected to whatever this thing really was. Somehow, he'd found a way to use it. And if he could reach me through the static, it meant one terrifying thing. He wasn't finished with me yet. And then, through the static, I heard Mason's voice saying, "You shouldn't have gone there." The next day, I found a note slipped under my door. "Everything has a frequency, even your fear." The paper was thin and neatly folded, the handwriting precise and elegant. The moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. Mason. There was no doubt in my mind. Somehow, he knew where I lived. I ran to the window, peering through the curtains. The street outside was quiet, the morning light spilling across empty driveways and parked cars. No sign of him. But the silence felt wrong, heavy, watchful. I locked the doors, checked every window, and double-bolted the back entrance. My hands were shaking. I wanted to believe it was just intimidation, some psychological game, but deep down, I knew Mason wasn't the type to play harmless games. He wanted the radio, and he wasn't going to stop until he got it. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn the radio on. It sat on my desk like a coiled animal, waiting. Even unplugged, I swore I could hear faint vibrations coming from it, a slow, rhythmic pulse that matched my heartbeat. I decided to fight back the only way I knew how, by understanding it. If I could figure out what the radio was doing, maybe I could protect myself. So I called Nadia. Nadia was an old college friend, a sound technician and programmer who worked with digital frequencies. She'd always been fascinated by odd signal behavior, and if anyone could help me decode what was happening, it was her. When she arrived, I could see the skepticism in her eyes as I explained everything. "So, you're telling me this radio, a 70-year-old hunk of wood and wires, is broadcasting ghosts?" "Not ghosts," I said quickly. "Recordings, maybe trapped signals, I don't know. But it's real. Just listen for yourself. I turned the dial to the same frequency as before, the one that always hummed. The radio crackled softly, then steadied into that familiar low hum. Nadia leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. That's strange. There's something under the static. She pulled out her laptop and a portable sound scanner, connecting a small mic near the radio's speaker. The waveform that appeared on her screen wasn't random. It pulsed in a repeated pattern, consistent, deliberate. It's not just noise, she murmured. It's layered. We ran it through a few filters, amplifying the underlying tones. Slowly, the chaos of static began to form something recognizable, a sequence of rhythmic beats, faint but distinct. It's Morse code, Nadia said, her eyes widening. Old school. Someone encoded a message. Together, we decoded the signal, letter by letter. When the final words appeared on her screen, I felt my heart stop. Eleanor Ray. Preservation system active. Nadia leaned back in her chair. Preservation system? What does that even mean? I swallowed hard. I think it means she succeeded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air in the room seemed to vibrate with a low, humming tension. Nadia frowned, scrolling through the audio again. There's something else here, subharmonic waves, almost like an encrypted layer, beneath the Morse signal. That's impossible for tech this old. She typed furiously, decoding the embedded signal. And the screen filled with data. What emerged next didn't make sense at first. Diagrams, circuit models, equations. But when we looked closer, the realization hit both of us at once. They're blueprints, Nadia said softly. She hid her entire design inside the static. The radio is just a carrier, a storage device. The full weight of it crashed over me. Eleanor hadn't just built a radio. She'd created a medium for hiding knowledge, perhaps even consciousness inside sound itself. Before we could say anything more, a faint movement outside the window caught my attention. A shadow shifted across the glass. My heart jumped. I motioned to Nadia to stay quiet, turning off the radio and the lights. We crouched low, the only sound our own breathing. The shadow lingered a moment, then moved away. I crawled toward the curtain and peeked out. Mason's car was parked across the street. I watched as he sat there, motionless, eyes fixed on my house. My hands went cold. He's here, I whispered. Nadia grabbed her laptop. We need to get out of here, now. We slipped quietly through the back door, keeping low as we moved toward her car. Every creak of gravel beneath our shoes felt deafening. Just as we reached the gate, a light flicked on behind us, my living room window glowing bright. He's inside, I breathed. We bolted for the car, hearts pounding. Nadia started the engine, and we sped off down the street, not daring to look back. Once we reached a diner on the edge of town, we parked and sat in silence, both shaking. After a long moment, Nadia exhaled and said, "He's not just after the radio. He wants what's inside it." I nodded numbly. He called it a transmitter. Said it could absorb and react to emotion. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's not just a recording device. Nadia looked at me seriously. If that's true, it's worth more than money. It's a breakthrough in communication or control. Her words made me shiver. I looked down at the radio still clutched in my lap, its surface warm despite the cold night air. And then, out of nowhere, a flicker of movement on the diner's glass window made me freeze. Reflected behind us, through the glass, I saw him, Mason, standing under a streetlight, watching us with a faint smile. And as she said those words, we both saw Mason's reflection watching us through the window. From that night on, my life became a chase between signals and shadows. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every creak in the floorboards, every faint hum of electricity, every shadow that lingered too long outside my window made me flinch. Mason wasn't just following me, he was studying me. Watching how far I would go to protect something I didn't fully understand. After the night at the diner, Nadia and I decided to move the radio somewhere safer. My house no longer felt secure. We wrapped it in blankets and stored it inside an old trunk in her studio, a soundproof room lined with recording panels. If he's tracking it by signal, she said, this should block whatever frequency he's using. For a while, it worked. The static stopped, the whispers went silent, and I almost convinced myself we were safe. But the quiet never lasts long when something is still listening. 3 nights later, the humming returned louder this time. The sound came from inside the trunk, even though it was sealed shut. I felt it before I heard it. A low vibration running through the floor, steady as a heartbeat. Nadia and I exchanged nervous glances. Maybe it's picking up interference, she suggested, though her voice wavered. Interference doesn't sound like breathing, I said. We opened the trunk together. The radio glowed faintly, the dial spinning on its own. My hands trembled as I reached for the switch. But before I could touch it, a voice broke through the static. It was deeper than before, older. Fiona. Stop. My heart stuttered. I knew that voice. It was my grandfather's. I stepped back, shaking my head. No, this can't be real. Stop searching, the voice continued, broken and grainy. You're opening doors you can't close. I froze, unable to breathe. Grandpa, what doors? What's happening? The radio buzzed sharply, the sound twisting into a low rumble, almost like thunder. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the voice was gone. The dial went dark. Nadia exhaled shakily. You heard that too, right? Please tell me I'm not losing my mind. You're not, I whispered. He's trying to warn me. That was when the fear began to turn into obsession. If my grandfather's voice was coming through, that meant his consciousness, or at least fragments of it, had somehow been preserved within the radio's signal system. Maybe Eleanor had done the same to herself. The radio wasn't haunted, it was holding echoes of them both. But Mason had said something before that I couldn't stop thinking about. It's already connecting to you. Was that what he meant? That the radio wasn't just playing old memories, but linking itself to whoever listened too closely? I tried to distance myself, to stay away from it. But the pull was magnetic. Every time I sat in silence, I could almost hear it calling me, a faint hum beneath the noise of the world. Nadia grew more cautious. We need to go to the authorities, she said. If he's threatening you, you can't keep hiding. I shook my head. And tell them what? That an antique radio is haunted by frequencies from the 1940 seconds? They'd laugh me out of the station. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Then at least let me call someone I trust, a friend in signal analysis. Maybe he can trace where the interference is coming from. Before I could answer, her computer pinged. She turned the monitor toward me. Someone's accessing the security feed remotely. The camera on the corner of her studio blinked red, meaning it was active. We hadn't turned it on. My stomach dropped. The screen flickered, and for a moment, I saw him, Mason. He was standing outside the building, looking directly into the camera, his expression calm and deliberate. Then the feed went black. We didn't wait to see what came next. We grabbed what we could, the radio, the blueprints, the letter, and ran out the back door. The streets were nearly empty as we sped away, headlights cutting through the fog. My hands were clenched so tightly around the radio that my knuckles ached. I could feel the faint vibration inside it, like a living pulse. We drove for nearly an hour before stopping at an all-night gas station on the edge of town. My nerves were raw, my mind buzzing. We can't keep running like this, I said, setting the radio on the car seat. We need to know why he wants it so badly. Nadia nodded slowly. If we can't sell it, maybe we can hide it where no one can get it. Somewhere it'll never be found. But even as she said it, I knew hiding it wasn't the answer. The radio didn't want to be hidden. It wanted to be heard. The next morning, I made a reckless decision. I called an antique auction house in the city under a fake name and told them I had a one-of-a-kind prototype radio from the 1940 seconds. The appraiser, curious, agreed to meet privately the next day. Nadia thought I'd lost my mind. You're handing it right to the kind of people Mason works for, she argued. I just need to know what it's worth, I said. Maybe if I understand its value, I'll understand why they're chasing it. We met the appraiser in a quiet warehouse downtown. He examined the radio carefully, his expression shifting from interest to disbelief. This design shouldn't exist, he muttered. It's decades ahead of its time. He looked up at me. You need to get this insured. It's likely the only one in existence. I felt a flicker of relief until the lights in the warehouse suddenly flickered and went out. The air filled with static. When the emergency lights came on, the appraiser gasped. The radio was gone. The window behind the table was shattered, the cold air rushing in. I stumbled back, panic clawing at my throat. No, no, no. We ran outside, but the alley was empty. No car, no figure, no sound. Only the faint echo of a humming frequency that seemed to mock me as it faded into the night. But before the appraisal could even be completed, the auction house was broken into, and the only thing missing was my radio. When I arrived at the scene, the police said there was no sign of forced entry. Their words barely registered as I stood in that dimly lit warehouse, staring at the empty space where my grandfather's radio had been just hours ago. My hands shook, my chest tight. The shattered window, the overturned chair, the half-drunk cup of coffee, they were all pieces of a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The appraiser looked pale, his voice trembling as he repeated the same thing to the officer. I stepped away for a moment, and it was gone. Gone. The police treated it like a routine theft, filling out reports and asking the same hollow questions. Was it insured? Do you have photos? Any known enemies? I could barely answer. Every word felt like static buzzing in my ears. When they finally left, the silence that followed was unbearable. Nadia found me still standing there, staring at the broken glass. He took it, I said quietly. It has to be Mason. She placed a hand on my shoulder. We'll get it back. But we both knew how impossible that sounded. Mason had always been one step ahead, always in control. If he wanted the radio, he'd made sure no one else would ever see it. Again. The days that followed blurred into each other. I stopped going to work, stopped sleeping, stopped eating properly. My house felt hollow without the familiar hum of that radio, as though the silence itself had weight. Every time I tried to rest, I swore I could still hear faint static, like an echo bouncing inside my skull. 3 nights after the theft, I woke to the faint glow of my computer screen. It was on, even though I hadn't touched it. My email inbox was open, a new message blinking at the top. The sender's name made my stomach drop. M.W. No subject line, no text, just an attachment. My hands trembled as I clicked it. The file opened to reveal a short audio recording, no longer than 30 seconds. At first, it was static. Then came a faint voice, distorted but unmistakable. Stop looking for me, Fiona. Mason's voice. And behind his words, layered softly, was another sound, a woman humming. The same old jazz tune that had started it all. I'll be seeing you. The audio cut off abruptly. I stared at the screen, cold sweat running down my neck. He was taunting me. But that wasn't what terrified me most. It was the background sound, that soft hum. I'd know it anywhere. The radio was on. Somehow, wherever Mason had taken it, it was active. Broadcasting. And that meant I could trace it. I sent the file to Nadia right away. Within hours, she'd isolated the frequency patterns. It's a signal loop, she explained over the phone, her voice tense. He's using the radio to transmit on an old shortwave band. If we can track the bounce pattern, we might be able to find its source. That small sliver of hope was enough to keep me going. We spent the next 2 days decoding the transmission data, triangulating locations, following faint bursts of signal strength that flickered like breadcrumbs across a digital map. Finally, the readings converged on a single point, a private auction house in New York City. At first, it made no sense. But then Nadia found an online listing in an exclusive collector's forum, the Ray frequency device, authentic prototype. No images, no description, just a starting bid, $50,000. My stomach twisted. He's selling it. I didn't think. I just acted. I sold my car, emptied what little savings I had left, and bought a train ticket to New York. Nadia wanted to come, but I refused. He's after me, I told her. If you're there, you'll be in danger too. She didn't argue, though I saw the fear in her eyes as she hugged me goodbye. Be careful, she said softly. And whatever happens, don't let him take you too. The train ride felt endless. My thoughts tangled between fear and anger. I couldn't stop picturing Mason holding the radio, tuning it, listening to the voices that belonged to my family, to Eleanor. The idea of him exploiting their memories for profit made my blood boil. When I arrived in the city, I changed clothes, used a fake name, and went straight to the address Nadia had traced. The auction house was tucked away on a quiet street, its glass doors polished to perfection. Everything about it screamed secrecy. Inside, a woman at the desk greeted me with a professional smile. Are you here for the private event? Yes, I said, steadying my voice. Name's Claire Donovan. She checked her list and nodded. Welcome, Miss Donovan, you're just in time. She handed me a paddle and led me to a dimly lit hall filled with well-dressed bidders murmuring softly among themselves. The air buzzed with quiet anticipation, the kind that came before a sale of something truly rare. When the auctioneer took the stage, he introduced the night's highlight, an experimental broadcast device, believed to be a one-of-a-kind invention by pioneering engineer Eleanor Ray. My pulse quickened. My entire body went cold as the curtain lifted, revealing the object under a spotlight. There it was. My grandfather's radio, polished, restored, the wood gleaming under the lights. But as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something that made my breath catch. The small engraving on the back panel. For FB, the one who listens, was gone. Scraped clean. Someone had tried to erase his name. I clutched the paddle tightly, the edges digging into my palm. I didn't care how much it cost. I was going to win it back, no matter what. But as I scanned the room, my blood ran cold. In the back corner, seated calmly with his hands folded, was Mason, watching me. He smiled when our eyes met, slow, deliberate, knowing. And when they unveiled the radio on stage, the first thing I noticed was that the engraving, my grandfather's initials, had been scraped off. The auction began, and I realized I wasn't the only one desperate to reclaim it. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the dimly lit hall, his words crisp and practiced. We'll begin the bidding for the Ray frequency device at $50,000. A murmur rippled through the room, followed by the first paddle raised a man in a tailored navy suit near the front. 50,000, the auctioneer confirmed. Another bidder countered almost immediately. The price jumped in rapid succession, 60, 70, 80. I barely heard the numbers. My eyes were fixed on the radio under the glass dome. It looked different, polished, whole, but I could still sense its hum. Even from where I sat, I could feel the faint vibration in the air, like it was alive and aware of the chaos surrounding it. Across the room, Mason sat with his usual composure, his gaze shifting casually between me and the stage. He wasn't bidding yet. He was waiting, calculating, letting everyone else drive up the price first. The auctioneer's gavel hovered in the air. $120,000. Do I hear 140? My hand shot up before I could second-guess myself. 140,000. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Heads turned toward me, strangers sizing up the woman bold enough to throw that kind of money around. Mason's eyes narrowed slightly. Then his paddle rose. 160. The air thickened. I clenched my jaw. 180. He smirked, not looking at me this time. 200. The room had gone utterly silent now, the energy shifting from curiosity to fascination. The two of us were the only ones still in it. Everyone else had stopped bidding, content to watch whatever strange power struggle was unfolding between us. 220, I said quickly, not giving him time to breathe. 250, Mason countered smoothly. The auctioneer's voice rose in excitement, his gavel waving in rhythm with the tension. 250,000, do I hear 275? My heart pounded so hard I thought the whole room could hear it. Every instinct told me to stop, that I was spiraling into something I couldn't afford, but this wasn't about money anymore. This was about my grandfather. About Eleanor. About the truth that radio held. 275, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. Mason tilted his head, smiling faintly. 310,000. A soft gasp rippled through the crowd. Even the auctioneer paused, blinking. 310,000, going once. I froze. My hands trembled in my lap. That was it. That was my breaking point. I didn't have another dollar to give. The world around me blurred, the numbers melting into meaningless sound. Going twice? I wanted to scream. To tell them it wasn't just an antique. It was a legacy, a voice, a memory. But all I could do was sit there, motionless, my heart breaking as the gavel came down with a sharp crack. Sold to Mr. Mason for $310,000. Applause filled the room, hollow and distant. Mason rose gracefully, his expression unreadable. He adjusted his cufflinks, nodded to the auctioneer, and walked toward the back of the hall. I couldn't move. My throat burned. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. He had it again, the radio. The key to everything, and I'd lost it right back to him. When the crowd began to disperse, I followed him quietly, slipping through the aisles and out into the dimly lit hallway. He was at the reception desk, signing documents, his voice low and measured as he spoke to the auction staff. A woman handed him an envelope, thick, sealed, and clearly important. Mason slid it into his coat pocket. As he turned to leave, I ducked behind a pillar. My pulse thudded in my ears. I watched him walk toward the exit, his posture calm, his steps unhurried. But something didn't fit. He wasn't carrying the radio. Panic spiked in my chest. If he didn't have it, who did? I waited until he disappeared through the doors, then hurried to the front desk. "Excuse me," I said to the attendant, forcing a smile. "I'm with the buyer, Mr. Mason. He asked me to collect the item for transport." The woman glanced down at her clipboard, then back up at me. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but the buyer arranged for a private courier to handle the item directly." "Courier?" I echoed. She nodded. "Yes. The gentleman just left with it a few minutes ago. Black car, tinted windows." My stomach dropped. "Did you see who they were delivering it to?" She hesitated, flipping through her papers. "I believe it was a Dr. Ray. He said she was the rightful owner of the piece." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. "Dr. Ray?" She nodded again. "Yes, Dr. Evelyn Ray." The name hit me like a thunderclap. Could it be another Ray? Someone related to Eleanor? I stumbled back, my heart racing. Mason hadn't bought it for himself, he'd been working for her. Or maybe against her. I ran outside, scanning the street just in time to see a black sedan turning the corner. Through the window, I caught a glimpse of a man in the passenger seat holding the radio carefully in his lap. The car disappeared into traffic before I could even take a step. I stood there, breathless and furious, watching the taillights fade into the night. Mason had won the bid, but someone else had the radio now, and whoever this Dr. Ray was, she was the next piece of the mystery I had to unravel. But when I followed him outside, he wasn't holding the radio, someone else was. I followed the man carrying the radio into a sleek black car, and to my shock, the driver was an elderly woman. The car door opened with a slow, deliberate motion. The woman behind the wheel looked to be in her late 70s, but there was nothing frail about her. Her posture was straight, her gaze sharp. Silver hair framed a face that carried both elegance and authority. She glanced at me through the rearview mirror, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. I froze. The man holding the radio, the courier, slipped into the passenger seat and closed the door gently, as if handling something sacred. The woman adjusted her glasses and nodded once before driving off into the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. I sprinted toward the curb, waving frantically for a taxi. "Follow that black sedan," I shouted as soon as I climbed in. The driver hesitated for a split second but nodded when he saw the urgency on my face. The chase began. We weaved through traffic, headlights slicing through mist. My heart pounded in sync with the rhythm of the windshield wipers. The black car finally turned onto a quiet street lined with old brownstones and stopped in front of a building with an iron gate. A brass plaque by the door read, Ray Institute of Audio Research. So it was true. A Ray still existed, and she'd just bought back the very device Eleanor had disappeared for. I paid the cab fare and slipped out, staying hidden, in the shadows. The man carried the radio inside while the woman followed, walking with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew I was there. The door closed behind them. I waited, watching the lights flicker on one by one through the windows. After what felt like an eternity, I couldn't resist anymore. I crossed the street and pressed the intercom button. A voice crackled through the speaker. "You can come in, Fiona." I froze. "How do you know my name?" A soft chuckle followed. "Because I've been expecting you." The gate buzzed open. I stepped inside, every instinct on high alert. The building smelled of paper, oil, and faint ozone, the scent of aged technology. The main hall was lined with shelves of old audio equipment, reel-to-reel players, microphones, prototype transmitters, and hundreds of schematics pinned neatly to the walls. At the center of the room, under a gentle amber light, sat my grandfather's radio, and beside it stood the woman. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Ray," she said, extending a hand. Eleanor was my aunt. I hesitated before shaking it, my voice trembling. You're related to her?" "Yes." She was a genius and misunderstood by almost everyone she ever met, including the people who tried to steal her work. Her eyes softened. "You must be Frederick's granddaughter. You look just like him." Hearing my grandfather's name on her lips sent a shiver through me. "You knew him?" She smiled faintly. "Knew him? My dear, your grandfather and my aunt were partners. Without him, her invention never would have worked." I stepped closer to the radio, tracing my hand over its smooth wooden surface. "What is it really?" I asked. "Why is it worth all this chaos?" Dr. Ray sighed, walking to a nearby cabinet. She pulled out an old blueprint, identical to the one I'd found in the factory. "My aunt's invention wasn't just a radio," she explained. "It was the first working model of what she called a harmonic preservation system. She believed sound carried more than vibration, that it could carry energy, even consciousness." I stared at her, speechless. She built this device to preserve information within radio frequencies, not just audio, but thought patterns, memories, voices. She believed she could save parts of people through sound. I whispered. "So, when I heard my grandfather's voice," Dr. Ray nodded. "It wasn't imagination. He left pieces of himself behind, embedded in the signal. Eleanor taught him how. They both understood that voices are energy and energy doesn't die. It only changes form." My knees felt weak. I steadied myself against the table. Then why did they hide it? Why didn't they tell anyone? Her face darkened. "Because others wanted it for the wrong reasons. Governments, corporations, even collectors like Mason. They didn't see the humanity in it. They saw control. Imagine being able to store a person's voice, their mind, their essence, and replay it endlessly. It's not preservation to them. It's power." I thought of Mason's words, how he'd said the device could absorb emotion. "He's still looking for it," I said softly. "He followed me for weeks. Threatened me." Dr. Ray's expression hardened. "He worked for me once. I hired him to help find my aunt's prototype after it went missing decades ago. But greed changes people. He betrayed me the moment he realized what he was holding." I shook my head slowly. "He said he bought it tonight. Why would he give it back to you?" "He didn't," she said quietly. "He never intended to. I outbid him through a proxy before the auction began. He doesn't know it's here yet." Relief washed over me, followed immediately by dread. Then he's coming for it. She nodded grimly. Yes. Which is why we must finish what they started. Dr. Ray gestured toward the radio. Help me, power it. There's one final transmission left to decode, the one Eleanor recorded the night she vanished. I hesitated. You mean, she left her voice in there? Her voice, she said softly, and perhaps something more. Together we connected the device to a modern signal analyzer. The room filled with a low hum, the sound so deep it seemed to vibrate in my bones. The radio's dial glowed, the wood creaking softly as though awakening from a long sleep. Static crackled, then a faint, trembling voice emerged. It was Eleanor. Her words were distorted but unmistakable. To those who find this, our work is not lost. The frequency remembers. Protect it. Tears stung my eyes. Dr. Ray reached out, touching the side of the radio with reverence. She knew someone would listen. And she was right. The static faded, replaced by another sound, softer, warmer. My grandfather's voice. You've finally listened, he said, clear as day. My chest tightened. I whispered. Grandpa. The room fell silent again. For a long moment, all I could hear was the faint buzz of electricity and my own heartbeat. Dr. Ray smiled sadly. They were both speaking to you, Fiona. You were always meant to find it. And when the signal completed, the radio played my grandfather's voice one last time, saying, You've finally listened. Hearing my grandfather's voice again after all those years broke something open inside me. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was like feeling time bend. His words came through the static as clear as if he were standing right beside me, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. I had spent years holding on to pieces of him, his tools, his notes, his radio, but hearing his voice again was like touching a memory made real. It shattered every barrier between grief and wonder. Dr. Ray watched me quietly as I stood there trembling, one hand resting on the radio. The air in the room felt charged, like we were standing inside the heartbeat of the machine itself. The faint light from the dial flickered in rhythm with my pulse. He encoded his final message into the frequency, she said softly. Just like Eleanor did. Your grandfather understood her work completely. Together, they built something extraordinary, a way to preserve the human spirit through resonance. I turned toward her. So these voices, they're more than recordings? She nodded. They're impressions of thought, fragments of energy captured in sound waves. The device translates that energy into something the human ear can perceive. It's not speech, it's memory, echo, emotion. The closest thing we've ever had to immortality through frequency. The thought was dizzying. And Eleanor? She vanished trying to perfect it? She didn't vanish, Dr. Ray said quietly. She became part of it. The words hung in the air. I stared at her, searching for any sign she was joking, but her expression stayed solemn. When her experiments became too dangerous, when people started following her, she encoded herself into the transmission. My aunt's consciousness is woven into the signal patterns. She preserved herself in the very thing she created. I swallowed hard. Then that means she's still in there. In a sense, Dr. Ray replied. And so is your grandfather, at least, what he wanted to leave behind. They didn't die for this technology, Fiona. They lived through it. A quiet awe filled the room. I sat down beside the radio, tracing my fingers along its smooth wooden edges. It felt alive, warm to the touch, like it recognized me. For the next several days, I stayed with Dr. Ray at the Institute. Together, we worked tirelessly to stabilize the frequencies, decoding layer after layer of hidden transmissions. Each one held pieces of the past old radio broadcasts, laughter, snippets of conversations between Eleanor and my grandfather, even recordings of thunderstorms and city sounds from decades ago. It was like opening a time capsule made of sound. Dr. Ray recorded and cataloged everything meticulously. These aren't just voices, she said one night as we listened to a recovered segment of Eleanor explaining her theories. Their history unfiltered, unedited, pure. One evening, while reviewing a new transmission, we discovered something unexpected. The frequency pattern we were decoding didn't match any of Eleanor's known signal signatures. It was different, familiar, but not hers. When we filtered it and enhanced the audio, I felt my chest tighten. It was my voice. The recording was faint, incomplete, but unmistakably mine. It said, "If you find this, listen carefully." I stared at the screen in disbelief. How is that possible? Dr. Ray looked troubled. You've been in contact with the device long enough that it may have begun imprinting on you, recording your resonance. My resonance? I echoed. Your emotional frequency. The more time you spend near it, the more it responds to your energy. That's what Mason meant when he said it was connecting to you. The device isn't just a recorder, it's a mirror. It listens, adapts, and reflects the frequencies of those who engage with it. A chill ran through me. So now it's part of me? Dr. Ray smiled faintly. Or perhaps you're part of it. We sat in silence, the radio humming softly between us. For the first time, the sound didn't feel eerie, it felt intimate. I realized that maybe the radio hadn't chosen me by chance. My grandfather must have known I would listen, that I'd keep searching. Over the following weeks, our work drew quiet attention. Historians, archivists, and engineers began visiting the Institute, curious about the ray preservation device. Word spread among academic circles about the discovery of a functional analog-to-frequency storage system from 1,940 seconds. Dr. Ray managed the public side of things with calm authority, while I handled the restoration and decoding process. But despite the growing fascination from outsiders, we agreed on one thing: the device's true nature would remain a secret. Not everything could be shared safely. One night, after everyone had left, I stayed behind in the lab. I sat in the glow of the radio's dial, listening to the faint static. It had become a kind of comfort. "Grandpa," I whispered, "I think I understand now." The hum deepened slightly, as if in response. "I used to think I was holding on to the past," I said quietly. "But maybe I was meant to continue it." The static softened into a faint, melodic rhythm. It wasn't words, but I felt the meaning anyway. Pride, peace. When I turned to leave, I noticed Dr. Ray standing in the doorway, watching me with a small smile. "He's still with you," she said. I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "So is she." Dr. Ray stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You've done more than just find their legacy, Fiona. You've become part of it. The world may never understand what this device truly represents, but those of us who listen will." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of calm I couldn't explain. But calm never lasts. The next morning, the lab's security alarm blared before sunrise. The cameras caught movement, someone forcing their way in through the side entrance. Dr. Ray rushed to the monitors. Her face went pale. "It's him," she whispered. "It's Mason." My heart seized. He'd found us. But when Mason reappeared one final time, it wasn't for money, it was for revenge. Mason broke into the lab that night, demanding we hand over the device. The shrill sound of the security alarm pierced the stillness of dawn, jolting me from my chair. My pulse spiked as I sprinted down the corridor toward the main lab. The lights flickered violently, shadows leaping across the walls. By the time I reached the door, I could already hear him shouting, "Where is it?" Mason's voice thundered through the space. "Doctor!" Ray stood near the workbench, clutching the radio protectively to her chest. Her face was pale but defiant. Mason loomed over her, his eyes wild and bloodshot. The man who once seemed calm and composed was gone, replaced by someone desperate, unraveling. "Put it down, Mason," I said, stepping forward. "You don't understand what it is." He spun toward me, his expression darkening. "You think you do? You have no idea what this thing can do. Do you know how long I've been searching for it? What I've sacrificed?" I glanced at Dr. Ray, who was trembling but unyielding. "It's not yours," I said carefully. "It was never meant to be anyone's." Mason laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Everything is meant to belong to someone." You're too naive to see that. This device is the key to immortality. To preserving power, influence, legacy forever. His hand darted to his coat pocket, pulling out a small black remote. Step away, or I destroy it right here. Dr. Ray's grip tightened. You wouldn't dare, you've spent years chasing it. He smirked. I don't need it intact. I just need what's inside. I took a step forward. Mason, listen to me. This isn't preservation, it's corruption. You can't own what isn't alive. Alive? He barked out a laugh, eyes gleaming. You still think these voices mean something sentimental? They're data, Fiona. Pure, usable data. Ray and your grandfather stumbled onto a way to store neural signatures through sound. With the right technology, we can extract them. The horror in his tone was worse than the threat. He didn't see the humanity in the device, only profit, only power. Doctor. Ray suddenly stepped back, setting the radio on the desk. You want to see what it really does? She asked. Her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Mason frowned. What are you? Before he could finish, she flipped the switch on the radio. The lights dimmed instantly as the low hum filled the air, deep and resonant, vibrating through the walls. The dial began to glow brighter than ever before. Static surged, thick and electric. The frequency built into a crescendo that made the air shimmer. I felt it deep in my chest, like it was tuning to the rhythm of my heartbeat. Mason staggered back, clutching his ears. What the hell, turn it off! Dr. Ray's voice cut through the noise. You wanted to harness its power? Then hear what it remembers. The static shifted, forming into a voice clear, commanding. Eleanor's voice. Truth cannot be silenced. What is preserved in sound is preserved in spirit. Mason's face twisted. That's impossible. Her words echoed again, layering upon themselves, filling the entire lab with a haunting chorus of overlapping memories. I could hear my grandfather's voice join hers. Greed distorts the frequency. Let it go before it consumes you. Mason staggered, eyes darting around as if the voices were circling him. Stop it, he screamed. It's just sound, it's not real. The hum grew louder, and something changed in the air. The lights flickered rapidly, and Mason's voice began to distort his shouts, breaking into fragments, repeating over themselves like a skipping record. Doctor. Ray's hand hovered over the controls, calm despite the chaos. It's broadcasting him, she whispered. It's turning his signal against him. Mason, I shouted, stepping forward, but he stumbled backward, knocking into a cabinet. His reflection flickered in the polished metal surface, his face phasing in and out, as if the radio was capturing his frequency. He dropped to his knees, screaming as the static engulfed him. The sound built to a violent pitch then, suddenly, silence. The hum stopped, the lights steadied. Mason was gone. Only the faint smell of ozone lingered in the air. Where he had stood, the radio's dial glowed softly, pulsing once, twice, before dimming. Dr. Ray and I stood frozen, neither of us daring to speak. Finally, I whispered, "What just happened?" Her face was pale, her voice trembling. The frequency absorbed him. It reacted to his energy, the hatred, the greed. It's not a weapon, Fiona. It's a mirror. I looked down at the radio, its wooden surface warm beneath the faint light. A strange calm filled the room, as if the static itself had exhaled. The authorities arrived an hour later, responding to the triggered alarm. By then, there was no trace of Mason, no body, no footprints, no sign he'd ever been there. They ruled it a break-in gone wrong, their reports clinical and dismissive. But Dr. Ray and I knew the truth. In the days that followed, we secured the device behind reinforced glass. She filed the necessary patents and legal protections to ensure no one could exploit Eleanor's work again. Together, we renamed it the Ray Blake Resonance Archive. The day it was unveiled to the public, the institute was filled with quiet awe. Scholars, engineers, and historians gathered around as the story of Eleanor and Frederick was told how they'd built something not to control the world, but to preserve its echoes. Dr. Ray gave me a nod before stepping up to the podium. Some inventions are not meant to change the future, she said. They're meant to make sure the past still has a voice. When the crowd began to applaud, I looked at the radio behind the glass. The faint hum returned gentle, almost like a heartbeat. I smiled, whispering, "We did it." And for a brief moment, I thought I heard two voices whisper back in harmony. My grandfather's and Eleanor's soft, content, eternal. And as the crowd applauded, I realized that the static had finally turned into music. Today, when I look at that restored radio behind its glass case, I no longer see a relic, I see a legacy. The exhibition room at the Ray Institute glows with a golden warmth, sunlight spilling across polished floors and framed photographs. The radio sits at the center of it all, encased in crystal-clear glass like a time traveler caught between two worlds. People gather around it in reverent silence, whispering as they listen to faint transmissions echoing through nearby speakers, fragments of history, laughter, and old jazz songs. Every so often, when the light hits it just right, I swear I can see the faint outline of my grandfather's initials reappear on the back. F.B. The one who listens. It's as if the device itself refuses to forget. Dr. Evelyn Ray stands beside me, her cane tapping lightly against the floor as we watch visitors drift through the exhibit. "They'll never truly understand what it is," she says softly, a wistful smile on her lips. "But that's the beauty of it. Some things aren't meant to be explained, only heard." I nod, watching a small child press her ear to one of the listening stations, eyes wide with wonder as a soft voice hums through the static. "Do you think they can feel it?" I ask. "Of course," she replies. "The world doesn't change through inventions alone, Fiona. It changes through the people willing to listen to them." Those words settled deep in my heart. In the months since Mason's disappearance, life has felt different. Quieter, yes, but not empty. The radio's presence fills the space between what was lost and what remains. I've dedicated myself to continuing the work my grandfather and Eleanor began, restoring old recordings, decoding unfinished transmissions, and archiving the emotional fingerprints left behind in forgotten frequencies. The story of the Ray Blake device spread farther than we ever imagined. Journalists called it the radio that remembered. Museums requested temporary exhibits, universities reached out for research collaborations, and sound engineers studied the technology behind its impossible design. But even with all the attention, we kept its deeper truth private. Only Dr. Ray and I know the full extent of what it can do, how it doesn't just play sound, but preserve souls. Still, every time someone hears one of the recovered recordings, something beautiful happens. They pause. They listen. They feel. It's as though Eleanor's invention continues to teach the world how to slow down and truly hear one another. I glance at the dedication plaque beneath the display case. It reads, "The Ray Blake Resonance Archive. In honor of those who believed sound could carry the soul." Next to the plaque sits a small, engraved plate. I added quietly one evening after the exhibit opened. "To my grandfather, who taught me that every voice matters." The museum is rarely empty now. People come from all over to witness what they think is just an antique radio that miraculously works. They don't realize that when they lean close and listen to the faint hum, they're hearing the collective pulse of those who refuse to be forgotten. Dr. Ray has grown frailer, though her mind remains sharp as ever. We talk often about Eleanor, her brilliance, her courage, her decision to become one with her own invention. "She didn't die, Dr. Ray told me one night over tea. She transcended. That's what true creation does, it outlives its maker." I think about that a lot. About how creation and preservation are two halves of the same heartbeat. My grandfather and Eleanor never sought fame or fortune. They wanted to make something that mattered, something that remembered the sound of being human. When I'm alone in the institute after hours, I still visit the exhibit. I stand before the glass, my reflection merging with the radio's smooth surface. And if I listen closely enough, I can still hear them faintly, softly, in harmony. Eleanor's confident tone, my grandfather's warm laugh, the steady hum of connection bridging the decades between us. One evening, as I was locking up, I noticed something strange. The dial glowed faintly again, even though the device wasn't powered. I leaned in, heart pounding. A new sound emerged, soft, rhythmic static that slowly began to form words. A woman's voice, familiar yet distant, spoke through the hum. "The frequency continues, Fiona." It was Eleanor. Before I could respond, the hum faded, replaced by another voice, my grandfather's. "And it's in good hands now." Tears filled my eyes. I whispered, "I miss you both." The static crackled one last time, like a gentle laugh, then stilled. I stood there for a long while, the empty room echoing softly around me. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted by the silence. I felt embraced by it. It wasn't emptiness anymore, it was connection. The next morning, when the museum reopened, I noticed something new beneath the glass. A small engraving had appeared on the side of the radio that hadn't been there before. It read, "Everything has a frequency, even your heart." I don't know how it got there. Maybe it was my grandfather's way of saying goodbye, or Eleanor's way of reminding me that the work was never finished. Either way, it felt right. Since then, I've made it my mission to teach others how to listen. I started a foundation in Eleanor's name to support women in audio engineering, giving scholarships to those who dare to challenge what sound can be. I tell every student the same thing my grandfather once told me: machines have souls, you just have to listen carefully enough to hear them. And sometimes, when the day is quiet and the museum is still, I sit near the glass case and close my eyes. The soft hum returns, steady, patient, alive. Because now I understand. All those years people laughed at my obsession, called me foolish for clinging to an old radio. They couldn't hear what I did. They couldn't feel it. They thought it was just static. But to me, it was always music. Because sometimes, the things everyone laughs at are just waiting for someone to finally listen.